A lot of industries that view themselves as being apprenticeship driven have developed talent over the time, and they see the value in having done the most basic analytical work as really important. And if you automate it away, are you taking away a key part of talent development? We often think about this as, does it mean we're going to reduce the number of people or number of salespeople at a company because AI is going to be doing it? The other way to think about it is, if sales becomes more productive, for example, because of AI SDRs, you're actually just going to have more salespeople. I think as we're seeing in the legal industry, which is that more work is moving away from being hourly billed, I think the same thing will happen in accounting. I think customers will want more, and that'll change.
Welcome to Turpentine Finance, a podcast where we talk with top founders and finance leaders about what it takes to architect success. Our guests speak candidly about big business inflections, market curveballs, and how they approach decision-making so that you have the tactics and mental models for when the pressure is on. I'm your host, Sasha Orloff, founder, CEO, and self-professed finance nerd. You ready? Let's dive in. All right. Today, I'm excited to welcome Seema Amble to the show, partner at Andreessen Horowitz in the SaaS and the FinTech team. And Andreessen Horowitz just recently announced $7.2 billion in new funds across all sorts of stuff: American dynamism, consumer, enterprise, FinTech, biohealth, crypto, games, growth, and infrastructure. I guess that's what you get when you raise the B's of funds. Anyway, Seema is one of those traditional venture capitalist underperformers. Undergrad in JD MBA from Harvard, worked at Goldman Sachs, Blackstone, interned at Intuit and Amazon before going to one of these small funds like Andreessen Horowitz. She's also a very influential writer on a whole variety of topics. Two of my favorite and most influential pieces are written about the office of the CFO, so very relevant to our listeners. The first one was called A CFO in Crisis Mode, a call for new tools. And then she recently published a follow-up piece, I guess, called Death, Taxes, and AI, How Generative AI Will Change Accounting. And if that wasn't enough, from being a prolific writer on a whole host of topics, she's also a really cool podcast host called My First 16 and had, small guests like the CEO of Mercury, Plaid, Marqeta, Modern Treasury, and more. So with that, Seema, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sasha. I'm very excited to do this.
All right. So one of the first pieces that I love of your writing was a piece you authored called The CFO in Crisis, which got a lot of attention and I think was quite influential in this renaissance of this new investment hype cycle of the office and the CFO. So for any listeners who haven't read it, and we'll link to it in the show notes, but you can also just Google CFO in Crisis, Andreessen Horowitz or Seema. Can you share what were just some of the key insights?
Yeah. So this was written 4 years ago, 2020, we published it. And there are a couple of things we learned through the research process and wrote about. One, the overarching theme being CFOs just didn't have modern software. You saw modern software coming up and all the other, for product, marketing, sales, and CFOs were using this really antiquated software or not even having software. There was a lot of work that was still being done manually through Excel and email and paper. And so this lack of modern software was a really overarching theme. And then a second point was around just a lot of time being spent on manual data entry and just time not being spent strategically, both amongst the CFO and their entire team and how they spent resources. A third theme was just around systems and software that didn't talk to each other and then contained stale data. So, you were here supposed to be providing strategic advice, and the data that you were looking at was like 30, 60, 90 days old at best or incomplete. And you didn't have a way of reconciling your Salesforce data against the billing and the invoices that were getting sent out. And so, you had a person who was literally doing it. And then, and so I think overall we called out a few different areas for modern software to be built and really equip the finance team with the right tools.
What was the impetus to like this particular vertical? Because as you said, there's a lot of other verticals, lots of investment in improving software. What was the original spark that got you excited to think about this through the lens of the office of the CFO?
Yeah, great question. So I love writing blog posts, and usually my thought process for how I land on a topic to write about is you start seeing a trend, you're like, okay, let me dive in and see a little more behind what's going on. This topic in particular had been something I'd seen for a long time. So I've been investing in software for the last 15 years. I started in private equity, and when I was an associate in private equity, the thing that I had to do most often was spending time with finance teams, doing reporting, building models. And I firsthand saw how painful it was to work with, a lot of these legacy providers, and how much time I was spending just reconciling things with teams. I actually used to think about how I could automate my job. And so this was a topic that I'd been thinking about for a long time. And then I started here in 2019, and I was starting to see some early stage companies, at the seed, pre-seed, people start to think the same thing. And I was like, okay, I would love to like share my thoughts on this. And so that was really the genesis behind the piece.
Were there any surprises? I think a lot of times when we go into sort of research projects, we have a bit of a theme or a hypothesis in our mind, and then we go do the research, and some things likely confirm our hypothesis, some things are potentially surprising. Anything surprising before and after that?
Yeah. I thought it was pretty universal that people found their tools to be painful. And I think that was the case. But the surprising piece was that so many finance leaders had extreme PTSD around new software. Like they had gone through an implementation for, a NetSuite and a plan, whatever it was. They'd spent 6, 12 months, hundreds of thousands of dollars on consultants, and not necessarily loved the result of what had happened in terms of like using the software, or like the person who had gotten trained had left, or whatever it was. And as a result, they had this reticence behind adopting new software because they're like, oh no, if I have to do that and make that mental and financial investment, I don't want to do it. And so then some of my friends who are, millennials, who are CFOs, you'd think they were really, chomping at the bit for new software, were like, oh, I'd rather actually just hire someone to solve this problem. And that was actually pretty surprising to me. That said, I didn't walk away from that thinking, oh, there's no opportunity for software. It's just that software has to overcome that sort of mental block that a bunch of people in the industry seem to have.
Yeah, it's a dual whammy for anybody building in this space is the ability to build all of the features of these incumbents who have been on for a long time, and then the reticence because this is a lot of core infrastructure, and it does become really hard.
Yeah.
One of the, I think, interesting ways in which you broke down the industry in this original piece was this pyramid graph, again, which we'll try and show for those watching video, but otherwise it shows a hierarchy from where a lot of the time is spent to where a lot of the value is spent, from transacting to record keeping to reporting and compliance to financial planning, and then finally at the top, strategic finance. There are lots of ways to, I think, slice the market and think about it. How did you arrive at this as the visualization that you wanted to use?
Yeah. So in my mind, again, I had swirling around, okay, what are people spending a lot of this time on that they're logging in emails and spreadsheets? And I want to give a shout out to Sharon Alexi, who I know Sasha, as
Woo!
well, who actually, this pyramid came from her. And I was like, this is exactly what I've been thinking of. Thank you. We did a little bit of tweaking to her original pyramid, but that's actually, I had been trying to come up with like a framework for like, how do you think about all of the like, the manual work that's being done, and then how do you label it? And then so I went through and we kind of changed the top, the buckets, but that's actually how we came up with it.
And how, as an investor, when you think about this, do you view each of these as a potential theme for people to attack, or do you just view this as the general hierarchy of the industry?
It's a great question, because right as the piece first got published, there were a ton of companies doing FP&A and a visualization layer on top of the finances, which would be towards the top of the pyramid. And then I think as time went on, they realized, oh wait, maybe I need to get further into the data layer. And that's not to say that you have to, but I don't think that pyramid should just be sliced up and said like, okay, the reporting layer is a separate one from necessarily transacting, but you generally will start in one of those areas. I do think that like over time, you end up going up and down the pyramid.
Yeah, it's always interesting to find how all of these people are attacking the market and whether they enter it in through one of these layers or even just a segment of these layers and expand both vertically and horizontally.
Totally. I will say if you have crappy data coming in at the bottom, then everything on the top is sort of meaningless. And I think that is what goes back to my point around some of the FP&A folks coming back down and saying, like, how do I get better ground truth data? Because your planning information or your forecast is not particularly useful if you're pulling in, stale data that's not been reconciled across various sources.
It's a good transition into one of the other key points here. And for those that can see, I'm sort of sharing a screen of some of the market map. But one of the other key insights here was how painful it is for these systems to talk to each other still, which is sort of interesting because in a lot of other industries, data sharing and APIs and data is fairly common. It seems to be a bit of an anomaly in the accounting and financial office of the CFO world. Any hypothesis from your research on why that is?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons. One is a lot of the systems that finance is using are even like one or two generations behind. And those players were not built, or their DNA is not to open things up with APIs. Second of all, they often have the privilege of owning a large portion of the market. And for them, there's just not a lot of incentive to build APIs, or they have them. They're not easy to work with. And Sasha, you know this well. And so there's this kind of like, I don't want to say that it's intentional, but they haven't made it easy to work across systems. Second of all, there's just a lack of engineering and technical resources that finance teams usually get. So, a product team will be able to build out internal tooling. Even a sales team, has a sales ops team, and there's all these tools that exist and they're modern and they can string them together and they're easy to do that. Like, you don't have engineering resources on the finance team. How are you going to pull together systems, let alone legacy systems?
So if I'm trying to think now of some of the parallels in other industries, one that comes top of mind is Plaid. And banks were pretty reticent to want to open up and share. And a couple things happened all at the same time. One, Plaid became successful in being able to find workarounds for data sharing. There was some regulation that came in that said, maybe banks should have to share this. And then there's been a host of challengers in the market. Like, I think one of the Andreessen Horowitz portfolio was like Mercury, who has invested very heavily in an API and automation and a lot of benefits we're seeing. Are there other industries or any other parallels of what could be triggers that force the industry to move and share and collaborate more?
Yeah, look, I mean, competition is a great one. I mean, going back to the point around feature parity and being a real competitor, especially at the enterprise level, unfortunately, that just takes a while to get there. But we're starting to see it, and I think that that's a big motivator. I think another piece too is, one of the reasons Plaid also works, right, is like consumers want access to their data. Consumers are customers, right? And at some point, like, banks have to make sure their customers don't leave and are happy. I think to a less extent, honestly, unfortunately, for buyers of software, but I also think the groundswell of companies starting to say, well, I'm actually looking at this other provider, or like one thing we're seeing a lot in the ERP market is actually price drops amongst legacy providers because there are more options in the market. Folks are really hesitant to upgrade to NetSuite or, a larger ERP Oracle system, whatever it is. And even though those companies are great, we're seeing companies drop price. And I think that is one of the, signs that there needs to be some change.
One of the other things that dawned on me as I'm listening is we're also seeing a shift in the market of accountants go from sort of the majority of CFOs coming from an accountant background to the majority of CFOs now coming from a strategic background. And I don't know, it didn't dawn on me that part of this could be just some of the legacy of the accounting software and the lack of connectivity is turning accounting into a little bit more of a compliance role because it's so outdated. Like you said, you have to have engineers and people to connect all these systems together to cobble and reconcile it and make sure it's accurate, that by the time you have this view of your company, it's like you said, 30, 60, even 90 days later, depending on the size of a company. It's hard to be strategic about going forward in the business and driving a business forward if you're working on points of time months and months old. Any other, I don't really know what the point was. It was just, it dawned on me as I'm talking. Any thoughts, any agreement, disagreement on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the point you're getting at around the strategic CFO versus the more CPA CFO of the past, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I think, as we all know, there's this sort of decline in the number of CPAs, accountants out there in that field. And I think also a lot of the folks who in the last generation may have gone into accounting and been strategic and wanted a more CFO role, I think have now pursued other paths. And so that's part of it. I think also, I know like in my peer group, folks who become CFOs, like they've seen the elevated role that the CFO can have at a company in terms of, being strategic and not just being a reporting, a reporting confidant, more, helping really drive the strategic direction and being really a key right hand to the CEO has attracted more people into it. I have a number of friends, and I'm sure you do too, who've like taken paths towards CFOs, and they could have done anything else. And it's an exciting, lucrative path for them.
Yeah. Good. Thank you for pulling an interesting insight out of a half-baked thought along the way. So I guess one of the other transitions from this is it's been a couple years, I think about 4 years since you wrote this. We'll get into a little bit about another piece related that you published. Between then and now, what are some of the changes that you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, I mean the obvious one is all the oncoming of generative AI and what it unlocks, and I actually think it's very interesting for finance. Generative AI is around language parsing, and it's most suited for text and images. However, there's a ton of work in that at that bottom of the pyramid, which I think generative AI can assist in. And we're seeing like LLM powered doc extraction, which is very powerful in terms of a lot of the audit function, a lot of the reconciliation, and so AI can be really powerful. And I think automating a lot of that manual work that needs to happen. I think generative AI, we have seen less of this right now in finance so far, but it can help, I think, automate some of the reporting and analysis to both internally and externally, which I think will be really key. I think there'll just be more data being pulled into the team because code gen now is automated and you don't need the engineering resources. So I think we're really just in the early days. I think a lot of the new Gen AI tools, or I should say, CFO suite tools that are starting to pull in AI are just in the early days of doing so. But yeah, we're seeing a lot in that. So that's probably bucket one. Bucket two, in the last 4 years, we've seen a lot of exciting companies get built. I think FP&I mentioned procurement, spend management, billing, ERP. ERP has been very popular even in the last 6 to 12 months. And so that's been awesome to see. And so, we love seeing a new crop of companies being built. And then I'd say the other thing that's changed in the last 4 years is, as you talk to a lot of these finance buyers, this openness to buying new software has changed, which is awesome as well. And I think one of the most interesting insights I had from talking to a company was they've had the most success doing in-person events because a lot of the finance buyers never get invited to anything and they don't get to talk to their peers. And so they love going to dinners and lunches and events where they get to talk to other folks. And I think that's like a big change. Like that didn't exist 4 years ago. So yeah, those are a few of the things that I've noticed.
You could see how that ties back to one of your previous comments is this kind of resistance to wanting to adopt software and also some of the fear and intimidation about if the company goes away and what's AI going to do. And so I could also see in-person events like that helping with some peer selling of like, I've tried this, it's okay. It's actually much better. It delivers on the promise.
Yeah. Although to be fair, also there's a social aspect and you can't underwrite that as well. So
it's also fun. Hey, we'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Hey, everybody. If you're a business owner or founder like me, you'll want to know more about our sponsor, NetSuite. NetSuite provides financial software for all your businesses. Whether you're looking for an ERP tool or accounting software, NetSuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make better decisions faster. And for the first time in NetSuite's 25 years as the #1 cloud financial system, you can defer payments of a full NetSuite implementation for 6 months. That's no payment and no interest for 6 months. And you can take advantage of the special financing offered today. NetSuite is #1 because they give your business everything you need in real time, all in one place to reduce manual processes, boost efficiency, build forecasts, and increase productivity across every department. More than 36,000 companies have already upgraded to NetSuite, gaining visibility and control over their financials, inventory, HR, e-commerce, and more. If you've been checking out NetSuite already, then you know this deal is unprecedented. No interest, no payments. So take advantage of the special financing offer with our promo code at netsuite.com/turpentine. That's netsuite.com/turpentine to get the visibility and control your business needs to weather any storm. netsuite.com/turpentine.
Today, I want to make a bit of a personal appeal to anyone working on a SaaS app or website. If you spend any time on the internet, you probably have interacted with chatbots in the bottom right corner of sites. Most are really annoying. AI is making them better. But still, I often just get really useless generic answers out of these and end up just wanting to talk to a real human. It felt to me like AI shouldn't just make chatbots marginally better at text responses, but that they should enable a new type of web assistant. Something that feels like you're talking to a human support agent who is co-browsing alongside you. Command Bar is building that user assistant. Companies embed it into their web app, mobile app, or website. And they get a fully generative chatbot that can give personalized responses that refer to a user's past chats, perform actions directly on behalf of the user, like looking up account info, and even start browsing alongside the user to show them how to do something, like a tour guide. It can also nudge users when they seem confused or frustrated. I love when I encounter Command Bar in websites. It's white labeled, but at this point I can tell right away. Command Bar already reaches more than 20 million end users with major customers like HashiCorp, Gusto, Freshworks, 6sense, and more. See for yourself at commandbar.com/MOZ or follow the link in the show notes.
One of the other things before we kind of dive into the next piece in AI, one of the other things that I think changed, to your point, was the emergence of some now seemingly pretty successful and ambitious companies in the office of the CFO space. And so some of the ones that come top of mind are like the Rippling and the Mercury, the Ramp, the Brexes a little bit. One of the other things in that part of the stack and strategy is they seem to also be coming to merge and do these like all-in-one or bundled solutions or compound startups, as Parker calls them. Where do you see that trending in this space? Because it's sort of wedging in from typically if like I build a point solution to now as a new startup coming in or as somebody evaluating these software, you now have these new emergence of bundled softwares coming in. Do you think that continues? Do you think that changes?
This is where I repeat that famous quote about bundling and unbundling. And so I think that there will always be startups that bring a bunch of different capabilities together, and then point solutions will develop, and that'll just be the ebb and flow of startups over time. But I do think the truism in the background is that people want to use the best software that works for their use case, right? That's obvious. The reason that enterprise tends to like point solutions is their requirements tend to be much deeper, and to do everything well is hard. And so it's not impossible, and it's probably becoming easier, I think, as software is easier to build. And so I can see a reason for more bundling. But I think a lot of the companies that are also bringing together a lot of capabilities, I think they're not necessarily going after a true enterprise customer, or not yet, at least. The second thing is I do think there's inherently a relationship between a lot of these things that, in our second diagram, like with the bubbles around it, data does flow between them, right? And so, like, for example, there's an inherent relationship between spend management, a card, and procurement. And that is what ends up, leading into your source of data for your ERP. And so this stuff's all related. And so it's not unnatural to start bundling them together. But I think it really comes back to like your core customer, and can you provide the like depth of features for them if you are being broad, which is possible. It just depends on where you're playing.
And probably adding a bit more complexity, given this industry is one of the few that is somewhat resistant to data sharing in the world, financial services, whether it's a bank or some of the legacy softwares. All right, transitioning over to a newer piece, Death, Taxes, and AI, how generative AI will change accounting. What was the impetus to writing this piece? And then similarly, what was the most surprising finding when you started researching this and then after you published it?
Totally. So with this one, I've actually seen also like ebbs of accounting software for a long time. There are many software providers out there that are providing both like the vertical SaaS for accountants as well as the tax calculation software, successfully and unsuccessful, like successful software companies I've looked at in the past. More broadly, as generative AI came in, we saw this theme around professional services being able to be automated or software provided to them to automate many of their functions for the first time. So now I feel like a lot of people in the Valley are talking about how the work can finally be automated versus just the like workflow around it. Accounting is one of those areas alongside law, design, marketing, architecture, a bunch of other professional services where like a lot of the research, the client management, et cetera, could all be automated. And so I think we saw accounting as one of those areas. I think as we started to say, hey, this is one of those exciting fields, we also saw a lot of these incumbents in the market say, this is super interesting. We'd love to put a lot of money behind it. We've seen a lot of enthusiasm. And I think to your point around what's been surprising, so we put that piece out and the amount of outreach that came in to Mark and I has been unprecedented. I've written a fair amount of content here at Andreessen. And I think I've gotten more responses, not just from like companies, but CPAs who are like, I'm thinking about leaving my job and I've been thinking about doing this forever, or like big and small companies, like really the gamut of people who are really excited about this topic. And also if you're on Twitter, tax Twitter is actually quite active, as you may know, Sasha. And so it's been really cool to just see how many people in the field are really excited about this topic.
Well, that's also just generally fun to hear. Like, I obviously think accounting is super exciting and the industry of accounting is super exciting. Sometimes the role of accounting is slightly less exciting. One of the other insights from the piece was how much incumbents are really investing in AI. And so you cited PwC investing $1 billion, Reuters investing $8 billion. And then actually just recently we saw an announcement that Intuit not only is investing billions of dollars also, but at least was one of the first companies I saw that publicly said we are laying off people and replacing them with AI engineers because it's that big of an opportunity and or threat to their businesses. What were some of the key insights that you saw of where people were investing?
Yeah, I will put this caveat saying that it's early. I think people are announcing dollars to be spent. Those dollars have not all been allocated yet. And so I think it's honestly still in a little bit of a TBD of where exactly those dollars will be spent. But I mean, I think we can go back to this pyramid again, and the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, the manual work is a lot of it, right? And so it's like extracting data from different sources. The accounting industry overall has had less people going into it. A lot of that is in like bookkeeping, which again is at the bottom of the pyramid. And so a lot of what we do here is these firms wanting to invest where they're going to have labor shortages. And then also like they've invested a lot behind BPO and offshore services. And those are great. But like if there is an opportunity to do things like doc extraction and error checking, all that stuff, powered by LLMs, that's what they want to invest in. And so I'd say that's generally where we're seeing the theme alongside this comment around excitement. They're excited to look at the whole gamut of tools.
You talked a little bit about themes in the piece. So data collection and ingestion, which you just talked about, research, report generation and filing, client service and advice. If we think about that, a lot of that is centered around probably the current sort of hot topic of AI, the LLMs, large language models along the way. Is your view, where you sort of sit looking at the landscape as a whole, that is kind of the current iteration of AI and that it will be focused on language related stuff? How do we think about this existing and starting and getting better and better really quickly versus still some of the shortcomings of math? And accounting is kind of a combination of both. There are some discrete things that are math related. There's a lot of interpretation as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, great point. And I think anyone who says that the generation of a tax return is going to be completely done by LLMs in the near future is being overly optimistic. No, I think this is a real limitation and we should be cognizant of it, right? And as a result, I think where AI is being applied to sort of everything around it. And so a lot of what we talk about in the piece is less around calculation and more around retrieval, if anything. So if it's research, right, you're going in and being able to look through SEC filings, look through perhaps previous returns, pull up data. If it's report generation, it's literally just pulling data versus actually needing to do calculation. A big point that we point out in the piece is that accountants want more touch points and more frequent touch points with their customers or clients. Wouldn't it be great for them to be able to put together a snippet on here's where you're trending or here's what we've seen, auto generate even just emails with some content in them. All of that stuff I think is very doable. You're very rightly pointing out that I don't think that the math is necessarily there yet, nor is it, I think, getting the trust of this buyer. I mean, they're inherently super wary of being wrong. Like they want to be correct all the time. They've staked their reputation on it. And so I think that's the other piece too.
One of the other challenges, and I think setting up this next question, I think ties to I'm terrible at Twitter, but two of my most viral tweets happen to also be about accounting. The first one was about the friendly breakup between Intuit and Bill.com when Intuit launched their own version of their replacement as Bill.com as the embedded solution. And the other one was just copying and pasting this article in there about the incentive alignment in this industry or the incentive misalignment in this industry. Could you share more about 2 points in your piece? One about the incentive alignment with buyers and then the tops down versus the bottoms up adoption.
Yeah. So one thing that we point out in the piece is, similar to legal, accounting, tax departments in particular have structured their engagements on hourly rates. Auditors, on the other hand, have fixed fee engagement. And then there's sort of the slew of work between that can be some mix of the two. As a result, right, someone who's doing hourly based billing doesn't necessarily want their work to be automated, and because it becomes more efficient and then they can't bill as much as may be obvious. But I think as we're seeing in the legal industry, which is that more work is moving away from being hourly billed, I think the same thing will happen in accounting. I think customers will want more, and that'll change. I think the other piece around incentive alignment, which we pointed out, and it's something that came up in our research, is around talent. And a lot of industries that view themselves as being apprenticeship driven have developed talent over the time, and they see the value in having done the most basic analytical work as really important. And if you automate it away, are you taking away a key part of talent development? And so, I think that's another piece. It's less around the incentive alignment, but it's an interesting dynamic of how these firms work. But I think they are also faced with the reality of fewer junior people coming in the door, the cost of it, and likely, I think, fee compression over time too. And so I think that that'll get balanced out. But that was something that we were, we heard over and over again in our calls.
Hey, we'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Fast forward to the end of 2024. Think about your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If learning a new language is on your list, you absolutely need to check out Babbel. Babbel offers a range of learning tools, self-study app lessons, live classes, and even podcasts, which have always been my favorite way to learn. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel isn't just a game to kill time and make you feel like you're learning a language. It's not overly academic or rigid either. It's all about learning language for the real world. Babbel stands out because it's designed by real people using a modern conversational teaching approach. It's not always easy, nothing worth doing ever is, but it's straightforward and designed to help you start speaking in just 3 weeks. With Babbel, I was able to brush up on my intermediate Spanish to ramp up for travel to Argentina last year, and was able to set clear goals based on how much time each week I wanted to practice. Join millions of Babbel language learners across all age groups. Here's a special limited time offer for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only at babbel.com/Torenberg. That's babbel.com/Torenberg, spelled BABBEL.com/Torenberg. Rules and restrictions may apply.
One of the things that I'm starting to hear a little bit more with the proliferation of AI kind of talks to this point is this potential transition of selling software as a service to selling service as a software, which seems applicable in this particular industry. Any thoughts on that transition, or is just a catchy Twitter phase for now?
No, I mean, I think this goes back to doing the work versus just the workflow software, right? I think it's a transition. I don't think all the work gets automated. I think the other piece too is, to be honest, I think a lot of it will still be software as a service before service as a software happens, just because all this stuff happens as a progression. And the way, especially in professional services, is the way to sort of trust is to start automating the things that are not services necessarily. So like going back to my point around like report generation and client emails and all that stuff, it's sort of services, but it's sort of everything around the like core, like I'm generating the tax filing or I'm like doing the audit itself. So anyways, I do think the world is moving towards service as a software. I think what does that mean is really an open question, because I think one thing is there will continue to be a human in the loop for a lot of these products for a long time, if you are both from a trust perspective and from like a quality control perspective. But I think like going back to this BPO piece that I think a lot of other folks have pointed out, the amount of labor that you would be allocating towards any of these tasks goes down quite a bit over time.
What dawns on me, I hadn't thought of this before, but as you're talking, one of the challenges in building a business as a founder, or as somebody working inside of a company, is you have to kind of pick what your business model, what your industry is. And going into a services related business has typically been hard to fund for venture dollars because your revenue is tied typically to the hour of human capital. And if we can get agents or AI to leverage work along the way, then I wonder, any thoughts? Do you think that increases the multiple or the enterprise value of services businesses? Or do you think that traditional software businesses start bundling in more services into it? And what are the potential outcomes to like exit multiples for something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, obviously services businesses trade at a lower multiple than software businesses that have the higher margins and the recurring revenue. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle, right? And like services have always been part of software, right? We would be wrong to point out that it's always been pure SaaS. Like, take Salesforce, for example, or any software company, right? That's got a big implementation, that is services, right? Or like a service contract over time, right? So services have always existed. I think the way we charge for them will sort of sliding scale based on how much service there is versus true software. And I think investors will sort of pick that apart. That said, I think one of the themes that I actually find really interesting, having been a private equity investor, is like this bucket of what I would call business services. Like there's always a team at a big private equity firm that does like business services investing. And you're like, what is that? A lot of times it's things like, claims adjusting and payroll and things where I think of like, there are literally rooms of people doing the work. And over time we have built software that replaces it. So we are investors in a company that does payroll, and verticalized payroll in the past has been something where there have been people in the room that are doing the specific rules and union rules, accounting for payroll. That takes time. Building out everything those humans did, it just takes a lot of time, but it is possible. And we've seen it in payroll. And I think the same thing we are seeing in claims adjustment and a bunch of other industries. And now I think AI can supercharge that. So why am I bringing all this up? I just think that there are precedents of these services businesses being automated over time. I think it just takes time, and you have to be very strategic about what you automate and what has to be 100% right versus not. And then being honest about what is services versus software in the business. This is what the investor's job is at the late stage, to tease that bit apart.
I think it's funny, for those who can see the screen, as you're talking, it reminded me of this tweet that I thought was really funny off of a Reddit. And it was, what's a company secret you can share now that you don't work here? And Mike Rundle tweeted, years ago, QuickBooks let users upload receipts and then, quote, AI would identify the expense amount and category automatically. And sometimes it worked fast and sometimes it took hours. It was actually just workers in the Philippines. And it took a while sometimes because they were asleep along the way.
Yes. I mean, we joke sometimes because it's like AI is not new. We've been seeing pitches that involve, machine learning. The term AI has been thrown out for years. A lot of time, AI meant, we had a team of people in the Philippines or India or wherever doing things. But now I think we're truly actually seeing software take on those those jobs, and they can, and the training time has come down a lot. And so, even if you had AI and it was human assisted, it was like, oh, we have like 9 months of training humans plus computers around this, and now it's actually like a tenable service or software service to use. So
it requires training, whether you're using AI or machine learning. You need a data set, and just like software development, there will always be humans somewhere around. All right, well, let's transition over now to Andreessen Horowitz over there. You just announced a new set of funds. What gets you excited these days?
Well, back to the theme of AI. Very excited in investing in AI. So I spend my time looking at everything across the application level at the B2B side, so a lot of software, whether that is, the CFO stack. I've spent a lot of time looking at go-to-market tools, and I think AI is a really natural area to apply to sales and marketing. I wrote a piece on AI marketing recently, professional services. So there's a lot of broad applications of AI, a lot that are getting a lot of attention. And then again, going back to like the things that private equity invested in that were services businesses that can now become, software, like testing and inspection, things that, again, things that, are sneakily big. But yeah, anyways, they're more broadly, like just AI in general, I think is exciting. And, my colleagues across other parts of the firm are investing in AI and bio and healthcare, American dynamism, you name it. So.
And as you think about this as it relates to either SaaS or fintech, any preference on sort of the core underlying infrastructure versus the user-facing solution?
You mean in terms of what I prefer to invest in? Well, so I'm investing at the application layer. We have my infra colleagues who are diving deep onto the infra side and are the experts there, and we're very excited about investing that as well. It's just less of my personal expertise. But I think the beauty of working at a big fund is that you get to work with them and see what's happening on that side and how it's going to influence, because the infrastructure is what's being used to build the companies that I'm looking at. And so a lot of really interesting stuff happening in the infrastructure side, which usually precedes the cool stuff that's happening in the application side. And we're seeing that cycle now with AI.
So as we talk about AI, I think we hear a lot of people like investing in AI, and that's a broad range. You talked a little bit about the application, the services layer. Any other trends that you see happening, or what's the second order and third order? So let's assume we get to this sort of level of investing. What do you think about is the things that will get you excited 2 to 3, 4 years from now, and why?
Yeah, if you look at investing cycles, I've mentioned, it goes typically from, infrastructure into apps, and like a lot of the consumer use cases turn into B2B. I think we're still going to see that transition happening in 2 to 3 years, right? Like if you look at the early days of the internet, right? Like a lot of that consumerized work came to enterprise much later, and like especially bringing mobile into the enterprise world started in consumer, right? And so I think in 2 to 3 years we'll still be seeing this cycle play out, and I'm excited because there'll be a ton more very interesting enterprise SaaS apps out there. I think the other thing that'll be really interesting, I think, going back to what we've been talking about, is I'm very hopeful that the pieces around trust and things like calculation, I know LLMs are not built for calculation, but like the integration right now, it's like an additional, you have to essentially set a plug-in module on top of an LLM to do calculation. Like that's all going to become more seamless. So I think we're just going to be in a better place with buyers too. And I think one of the issues we actually have run into with a lot of professional services is like people get really excited at the top, and in a law firm or an accounting firm, they buy the software, and then the individual professionals are like, well, I'm not really sure I'm ready to start using it yet. And I think, again, in 2 to 3 years time, we're going to see them more excited to use it. And that means that the depth of software we can be selling to them is much greater. Another thing is, like, we often think about this as like, oh, does it mean we're going to reduce the number of people or number of salespeople at a company because AI is going to be doing it? I think the other way to think about it is, if sales becomes more productive, for example, because of AI SDRs, you're actually just going to have more salespeople. And so I actually think of it as, we like to think of it as there's more abundance versus it being like, okay, there's, jobs being necessarily cut. It's like more abundance or reshuffling into more interesting things. Going back to the CFOs team, I think more people will be focused on strategic stuff and less people will be focused on the more manual back office data entry type roles.
What's a hot take out there that you think you guys are getting right that maybe might be part of a counter narrative of AI or that you think other people are getting wrong?
It's a good question. It's too early to tell that we're getting anything right. As you know, venture cycles are on a long time series. Look, the firm, the way it's constructed is two big features. One is we have a bunch of funds that are vertically organized, and we pride ourselves on being specialists in what we invest in. And, there are a lot of folks out there that'll be more generalist. I'm a huge nerd. As you pointed out, I've got a lot of degrees. I like going deep. I like being a student of software, and I've been doing that for the last 15 years. I think that my colleagues in the other verticals are just the same. And I think that's an investment we've made as a firm, and people will say that's not the right bet, but I think we're right in having done that. And I guess I voted with my feet by being here. I think the second thing too is, as a firm, we've invested a lot in our operating partners. We've, got several hundred folks on, doing things like executive talent, technical talent, et cetera. And when I came in here, I'd worked in a bunch of funds and I was like, I'm not sure how valuable this is. It sounds cool. And I've just been blown away by actually how those folks are just ninjas at what they do and incredibly helpful. But anyways, those two, I think, were two things that are not necessarily consensus bets in the Valley, and we've invested in them. And I believe that they're both valuable, but time will tell.
And then with the new funds and your role, what's the earliest you like to invest and what's the latest you like to invest, either you or the fund or both?
Totally. So we'll invest at every stage, every check size, every stage. I'm doing early stage investing, which means, and then we work with our growth colleagues who take over for everything after that. And we work really closely with them. And so anywhere along that spectrum, we'll invest.
Good. So if you have an idea and you fit any of Seema's many published posts or anything on the new fund structure, reach out. How do people get a hold of you?
Yes. Email is best. LinkedIn and Twitter are also options, although those DM boxes tend to be a little slower on the response side. And of course, I'm interested in a lot of themes I've mentioned, around go-to-market and CFO stack and professional services. However, my colleagues look at everything else, and my partners are happy to look at other things in others. So I'm happy to route to others if there's something interesting. But we welcome referrals and thoughts from all of you. And so very excited and open to the DMs.
Awesome. Well, if you are building in this space and you are building and need capital or want a thought partner, I encourage you to follow Seema on Twitter and LinkedIn and reach out. And there's a lot of her writing, which we'll link to in the show notes, but a16z.com/author/Seema-Amble. And there is lots of writing and podcast links to get to know you.
And the other thing I meant to jump in when you said you were not good at Twitter. Sasha is an incredible Twitter user and puts out an incredible amount of content. So I appreciate you having me on the show and being able to share this time with you. I always look at what you've got written in every form and love reading it. So
thank you. All right, thanks, Seema. This was great.
Thanks for tuning in to Turpentine Finance. Share with your executive team, direct reports, friends, and family. And if you want to support the show, the best ways are to leave a review wherever you're listening and subscribe. Turpentine Finance is part of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Moment of Zen, Turpentine VC, Age of Miracles, and more. Shows for experts by experts in tech.